So, hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to read from the script now. Welcome to the United Church of Strafford, Vermont, to the third event in our speaker series entitled Election 2024. What is at stake? Welcome to you in the sanctuary, the ones I'm speaking to, and welcome to you online if there is anyone online. Okay, great. So welcome online. My name is Joey, and I am the moderator of the church. We always begin by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral and unceded land of the traditional caretakers, the Western Abenaki people. Part of our stewardship of this land is to govern the society that inhabits it responsibly. And that means, in part, being well-informed and actively engaged in electoral politics. We are hosting this series in our church sanctuary because we believe this is a sacred duty, and our choices need to be made in the context of our highest ethical values and philosophical ideals. This is in no way, however, a religious event. We have no agenda other than our two stated goals. First, to educate ourselves about what is at stake in the November 5th, 2024 election in a variety of issue areas. And second, to inspire ourselves to become active and devote time and resources and energy to help elect candidates who are more aligned with the nation and world we each want to create, whoever those candidates may be. We intend to abide well within the IRS requirements for a church, which means that we will not directly or indirectly endorse or oppose any candidate. We have asked all the speakers in this series to make clear the difference between the two major parties and their candidates on one particular set of issues, economic issues in this case, based on what the parties and candidates have done in the past and said about their future intentions. So, whatever your perspective, we welcome you here. The church aspires to be a safe place where people of differing views will regard one another with respect, compassion, and care, where we will listen deeply to understand the other's perspective, even if we do not share it. We will have a question and answer period and ask that during it, you do not criticize or debate argumentatively or attack, but simply state your own views and know that they will be honored with the same respect you give to others. This is not to say that we cannot feel strong emotions and passionate concerns, because of course we will. But it is to ask that we aim them toward issues and principles and values and ideals, and not turn them against other people. Please remember that we are here because we all share what our neighbor William Sloane Coffin called a passion for the possible. We are here because we all want a nation that fulfills its highest ideals and is a blessing to its people and to the world. So let us put our hearts and minds together this evening as one for the good of all. And now I'm going to introduce Jim. And the title of his talk, unless he's changed it in the last 24 hours, is Economic Issues Within an Election Circus, well named this year. So we're pleased to welcome Jim. Jim did not want us to go on too long about him, but briefly, Jim taught history and economics for 49 years. He doesn't look that old, but he is. And is a self-described news junkie, so he's had plenty of fodder so far this year. Since his retirement, Jim has taught many Osher classes, the most recent of which was entitled A Nation Adrift, Democracy, like Humpty Dumpty, is Teetering. Other courses he has taught have integrated history and economics to better understand the growing economic and wealth inequality and how this, more than anything, has exacerbated our present polarization and political dysfunction. Jim has lived in Strafford full-time since 2008. He is a former trustee of Strafford Academy, a hiker, former skier, photographer, traveler, and all-around outdoor adventurer, including climbing in the Andes, Alps, and Himalayas, not so recently. How about those? Right. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
Thank you, Joey. I should say, first of all, that during this time of the Olympics, you all deserve gold medals for coming out to hear anyone talk about economics. It's known to be the most boring of the social sciences. I don't think so, but I'll do my best to make it. I hope to make it interesting. Once- When I first got interested in politics and economics, this is really in the 50s, the two political parties were very much the same. I remember people sort of saying it was Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And I can remember thinking and probably saying to some of my friends, you know, wouldn't it be great if the two parties each really stood for something different? Well, be careful what you wish for. This year, it's, you know, it should be pretty simple, though, to simply go to each of the party platforms and say, okay, this is what Republicans believe, this is what the Democrats believe, and compare them and come up and spell it out for everybody. But this year, I guess every year is unusual, but first of all, in 2020, the Republican Party didn't even have a platform. And for the GOP, most of what we know is based on what happened during the first Trump administration, an agenda that has been put forth at their recent convention, and some differences, some statements have been made recently, but they're always changing. And as we know, there are always differences between what the candidate says and what the platform says and what really happens. And that's, of course, that's something we can't control. We just simply got to use our best judgment in looking at what might happen. Some of you are familiar with the 2025 project, which was a 960-page document put together by, mostly sponsored by the Conservative Heritage Foundation. And what they did was get a bunch of conservative scholars and business people and politicians to write about different issues and what they hoped would be part of a new administration's policies. At the beginning, candidate Trump said he supported it. When it became clear that this was pretty extreme, or many of the statements in it were pretty extreme, he's since denied that he really had any interest in it, although many members of his former administration have written. So it's sort of it gives us a little bit of a hint of where that administration might go. Agenda 47 is sort of the official statement by the Republican administration of where they stand in the issue, and I'll refer to some of those items in a few moments. And then with the addition of Vance as the vice president, we really don't know a lot about him. He's, in his political views, are certainly dealing with economics. As someone said, was probably brought on board to intellectualize Trump, and so far, since he's only been in the Senate for a few years, we don't really have too much to know what he believes. For the Democrats, it's a little bit easier because of the 4 years of the Biden administration. We know what they've done, what they've tried to do. But then, of course, 3 weeks ago, there was a change in the leadership. And so that much of what we have to go on, we have to go back to see what Kamala Harris spoke about when she was vice president, when she was in the Senate. Those of you who watched the rally in Philadelphia last night, I think got a little bit of an insight into where the two parties stand. Now, that was clearly from the Democratic perspective, but the addition of Tim Walz, who does have a long record of legislative accomplishments and positions, both as a congressman and as more recently as governor, I think gives us a better indication of where the Democratic Party is headed. Before we talk about the issue, I want to just touch on a couple of points of context. First of all, the obvious is much of what happens to the economy is well beyond the control of the president. Obviously, the president at a time of election gets blamed or rewarded for good things happening to the economy. but in reality, the impact the president has is rather minimal. So when I was at high school, and I think probably most of you had the same experience, we were taught that come election time, people would sit down and carefully look at the issues. You know, you can imagine families sitting down at the dining room table and saying, okay, now what are the positions on taxes, and what are the positions on trade, and what are the positions on gun control, and would weigh the pros and cons, and then after carefully looking at all the issues, then would decide to vote for candidate or candidate B. In reality, it probably doesn't happen that way for most people. And when you realize that by a recent poll, over 35% of voters today believe that we're in a recession, and 58% of voters, this is from a recent poll, that the president sets interest rates, you know, you sort of begin to lose a little confidence in the on what lies behind the democratic process. Peter Drucker, a well-known political scientist and economist, after the 2016 election, in writing a rather long essay about elections, wrote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And he was referring directly to the 2016 election, where, as you may recall, Hillary Clinton had many documents and papers on every possible topic. And I can remember many times listening to her speak, or members of her party speak, and say, if you want to know more about what the Clinton stand is on, and you name it, go to this particular document that was online. She had everything covered. But when it comes down to an election, as Peter Drucker said, and I think he was right then, and I think he's right today, that what people are really interested in is what kind of a society are we going to have. And this could not have been clearer in last night's rally, when Kamala Harris said several times, that the issues is what kind of a society do we want? What kind of society do we want our children and our grandchildren and their children to live in? And that's more than just what taxes are, what the GDP is, and what prices are, and that sort of thing. It's the whole framework of culture. Fundamentally, it's a question, I think, of do you want your children and your grandchildren and their children to live in a genuine, multiracial and multicultural, inclusive society? And the jury is still out. As a sidelight, I would say no large society has ever created a genuine multiracial and multicultural society. That's a little bit frightening to think about that. It's never happened before. And that's really what we're trying to do. Now, it's not, the election is not framed necessarily in those terms, but in my opinion, that's what really lies behind, and I think really lies behind what most of our elections are about. That does involve the economy, involves the economy very much, because it's very clear to me that if people are reasonably content with their lives economically, with their jobs, with their communities, where they live, what their expectations are, what their sense of opportunity is, if they feel good about that, then they are generally more open to more diversity, to cultural change, the kinds of divisions that are really tearing this country apart, in my opinion, right now. So the economic issues are critical. As Joey mentioned, the recent course I taught was entitled "A Nation Adrift: Is Democracy" by Humpty Dumpty, Teetering, which it certainly is. And we were adrift, I think, because of three revolutions that have taken place in the last 50 or 60 years. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about these because I think it explains the division that we are experiencing today and the differences between the two-party states. In the last 50 or 60 years, there have been three major revolutions in this country. You could probably list more, but one is simply the economic revolution. tens of millions of people's lives, not many of them in the Upper Valley, have been uprooted as a result of globalization and technology. Tens of millions of people have lost good jobs. Their villages and their towns and their communities have been destroyed. Many of them in the Midwest, South, and the Southwest. And that has had a devastating effect on the communities and the people who live there. The second revolution is the social, or what I really call a demographic revolution. By 2040, white people in this country are going to be a minority. Most of us say, big deal. But for people whose lives have been uprooted, this is, for many, of real concern. The fact that people like us, most of us in this room tonight, who've been the pillars of society, are now discovering that there are other people, others, as they are sometimes called, who look different, who eat sometimes different food, listen to different music, in some cases, have different ideas and values. They're beginning to make inroads into our communities. And this is very, very disrupting. Seems strange to many of us, but it's the reality. And the third revolution is a cultural revolution. And we've all been a part of that, about sexual mores, about gender identity. It's a hot topic, in most parts of the world today, certainly most parts of this country, something that most of us have sort of come to embrace and accept over time, but is not accepted that way throughout the country. You put those three revolutions together, all exacerbated by the revolution that's taking place in technology, communication. That has really created a division in this country where there's a mass of people who are very willing and very ready to accept someone who comes along and says, I am going to take you back to the way it was. And that makes a lot of sense. And we've all sort of experienced that. I can think of times in my own life, and maybe you can too, when things aren't going well and you think, man, I wish things were the way they used to be. And so it's the Republican Party today, which has become the party of Trump, and is really designed as a party of grievance. It's a party of anger. It's a party that is trying to provide security to people whose lives have been uprooted economically, socially, and culturally. And I think it's really important to understand that background as we look at the two candidates today and their platforms. And so we have really today a Republican agenda and platform that is anti-China, anti-immigration, anti-alliances with other countries, and anti-cultural change. And everything that Trump says is rooted in his belief that he can save us from China, from immigrants, and from the social liberals. And the fault of the establishment liberals, and that's what this populist movement is, the fault is the establishment liberals who opened the trade with China and let them steal our good jobs, open the borders to rapists and criminals. You've all heard the rhetoric, and undermining our culture and values, especially in schools and colleges, with ideas about gender and diversity in the environment. A lot of these things seem pretty natural to us, but there's a large portion of this population that sees this very, very different. One more point I want to make before we go to the individual issues. As in most elections, and certainly in this one, in my opinion, the long-term and most critical economic issues aren't even being talked about. Number one, the debt and the deficit. I won't bore you with that. That puts everybody to sleep. But it is a critical issue that simply keeps getting pushed down the road. And I've been reading comments by candidates of both parties, and they're sort of nodding their head and say, yeah, that's an issue, but, and then we've got to move on. Somehow we'll find a way to deal with it. The second thing that's barely being talked about, and it's related to the first, is the future of Social Security and Medicare. Those are the two programs that are costing us more and more and more. They're more and more valued by people, but they're exploding our debt and our deficit. Again, both parties sort of nod and say, yeah, and yeah, this is what maybe we should do, but nothing is being done, and no one is making concrete proposals to deal with it. The third one, and relates again is the whole issue of income and wealth inequality. I would argue that the basis for these revolutions and the fact that we're so divided in this country is the fact that income and wealth inequality over the last 35 or 40 years has been getting wider and wider and wider and wider. And there's a large body of population who are simply feeling left out. And this carries over to their ideas about immigrants and their ideas about cultural change. And the fourth topic that I think relates very much to our economy and is being neglected is simply public education and educating people for the 21st century. Again, there's a lot of nodding about it, how important it is, but very little being done to really make sure that we are educating our young people, providing opportunities for them to succeed in a world that is rapidly changing technologically and in almost every ways, economically. So what are the economic issues? Well, the first one that comes to mind, of course, is taxes. Where do each of the candidates stand? And my head is a little mixed up right now because it keeps changing every day. Literally this afternoon, I got back from playing golf and I went online to just check on something I wasn't sure about. And there's a brand new essay about Trump's latest proposal, which I'll mention in just a minute. But the first thing to understand about taxes is that in 2017, we had massive tax cuts, went primarily to people earning more than $300,000 or $400,000 a year. It included massive corporate tax cuts, cutting the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, huge tax cuts there. The plus is, obviously, many people, not lower income people, many people got more money, corporations had higher profits, and the deficit is estimated to have gone up between $2 and $3 trillion because of it. The Trump position is to, number one, and these tax cuts expire at the end of 2024. So that his number one platform, and my guess is that if he is elected, this will be number one on his agenda, is to reinstitute these tax cuts, these personal income tax cuts. And he says that he would like to lower the corporate income tax cut from 21% to 15%. I could go on at length about that. I'm not going to go on except to say that, again, both of these cause the debt, which we refuse to talk about, to balloon. One of his latest proposals is to eliminate the tax on tips, which sounds like a pretty good idea for mostly lower income people who are working at jobs where part, or in some cases, a substantial part of their income comes from tips. The estimate by a Congressional Budget Office is that for good or bad, this would cost about $1.2 trillion a year. Now, I know when you talk about trillions, it's mind-blowing. It's hard to relate to that, but it would cost a lot to do that, and would only affect a relatively small number of people. The second proposal, one that I've just learned more about, is a proposal to eliminate the tax on Social Security. That's something that might affect many of us. And again, the interesting thing about that is that the tax on Social Security, which is rather complicated, I won't go into the details of it right now, but for people who earn more than $25,000 or half of their Social Security gets taxed at a certain rate. And if you earn more than $34,000, you get taxed at a little bit higher rate. But whatever the revenue the government gets from that tax on Social Security goes back into the Social Security fund. As most of you know, the Social Security fund is expected to become insolvent by 2034. And it's estimated this tax cut, which would be a benefit to some people, would accelerate that process by about 2 years. The other interesting thing about it is that, well, I'll leave it at that. On the Harris side, what she has said is that she does not want to, and this is part of the Biden approach, does not want to renew the Trump tax cuts of 2017, except for those people who are earning less than $400,000. So although most of the tax cuts went to people earning more than $400,000 a year, what the Harris administration to be says that they want to not renew those tax cuts except for the people earning less than $400,000. Her main proposal, which is kind of interesting, is what she calls LIFT, L-I-F-T, a middle class act. And this should not be surprising if you listened to her last night and previous speeches. And this would be a family tax credit, sort of like the earned income tax credit, is that it would go up as you earn more. So there's incentive for people to work. And if they work up to a certain limit, they receive not a higher wage, but they receive a tax credit. And a tax credit, as you know, is not just a deduction, it is actually a payment that you get back from your taxes. And it certainly is, and something that she believes should be put into the tax code, not something that would expire in 2 or 3 years, but a permanent thing. So there's a distinct difference here. One side wanting to have some tax adjustments that would benefit mostly lower income people. The other side wanting to renew the tax cuts for the most wealthy. The second issue, probably, and related directly to economics, is that of inflation. What are you going to do about inflation? Well, both party platforms are very clear. We want to end inflation, period. Doesn't really help very much. And inflation is a toxic issue, and it's one that lingers long. I won't go into a long time, but it's something that people face every single day. And even as the rate of inflation has been going down, all that means is prices aren't rising as much as they were. It's not like unemployment, where unemployment may go up and then it goes down, or people actually go back to work. Things actually get better. But when inflation goes down, it doesn't mean that prices are going down. It just means the prices are not going up as fast. So if inflation is down in the neighborhood of 3%, 2.5% right now, that's wonderful. That means the prices are only going up at that rate, on top of all the increases over the last couple of years. And the people who are hurt the most are obviously the people who are living on tight budgets, who have to go to the store every day and have to watch very carefully, what they buy. So it's and the causes of it are never easy to decipher. If you get away from the political realm, some of it has to do with the post-pandemic government spending. Some of it has to do with the supply chain problem brought on mostly by the pandemic. A lot of it has to do with business concentration, the high degree of concentration in major industries in this country. And the place where a lot of people are really getting hurt by inflation is the high interest rates. And the high interest rates, interestingly, most affect people who have medical debt and have student debt. And unlike most of our European allies, where people do not have medical debt and they do not have student debt because of government programs, this impacts families very, very directly. What the Trump plan really is no particular plan except to say that we ought to cut government spending, which they say has been the major cause of the inflation, certainly has contributed to it, although there's no definition of where that spending is going to be cut, and cut energy regulations. So if we allow oil companies to drill, as they say, then energy costs could come down and the cost of living would come down. That's a pretty tame program. The Harris administration has not been any more forthcoming. They've so far assumed they're going to rely on the Federal Reserve to do whatever it can or has been trying to do by keeping interest rates fairly high to tame inflation, although that may be changing as we speak. And longer term, to be more aggressive in antitrust, to try to break up some of the big companies. And some of you may be aware of a major decision came out just a couple of days ago, declaring that Google is a monopolist, and that shows signs of perhaps over the next 4 or 5 years making some headway. Looking at, it's interesting that the Cato Institute, which is a right-wing think tank, and Moody's have examined the Trump plan for tariffs. And I put this sort of in this context of inflation, because one of the major Trump proposals for the economy is to impose tariffs on all Chinese products, and up to 10% and up to 60% on certain goods, and arguing that the Chinese will pay for this, that they're the ones who will pay if we put up these tariffs. Well, the Cato Institute and Moody's have both come out with extensive reports saying the people who pay for tariffs are us as consumers. The prices go up. We may not have as many of those things because of the tariffs, but the people who pay for tariffs are the consumers. And so both of these organizations are not exactly liberal thinking organizations, have argued that a combination of the tariff proposal by the Trump group and the plan to restrict or eliminate all undocumented immigrants, which would bring about a shortage of labor in many markets, particularly agriculture, would cause prices to go up. So that it's hard to see whether either party really has a plan, although the Trump agenda seems to be, if followed, would have an inflationary effect rather than curbing inflation. Another issue, of course, is how about doing anything about the entitlements? And again, both parties in their platform say we plan to make no changes in Social Security and Medicare, although in all the reports on the Republican side, the expectation is that if we have to come to grips with this, then the way to do it is increase the age at which people will become eligible for either one of these, particularly for Social Security, raised to 68, 69, even 70 years old. The Democrats, on the other hand, take a different approach and say, no, we don't want to decrease the benefits. We want to charge more and to raise the minimum. As most of you know, you only pay a Social Security tax up to $114,000 of one's income. They propose raising it to $160,000, $170,000, $180,000 of income, which would bring in more revenue. And that's sort of a traditional Republican-Democrat switch on issues like this. The Democrats generally in favor of not reducing the benefits, but finding other sources of revenue. the Republicans saying, no, we don't want to have more taxes, but we'll somehow tweak the benefits that might not be painful, in ways that might be painful. On Medicare, there are some distinct differences, and the big change in Medicare in the last couple of years, besides simply the growing numbers of people who are eligible for Medicare and the greater cost to the treatments that people of our generation are receiving, which are more costly, is that Medicare is now allowed to negotiate for lower drug prices. That was always one of the things that amazed me, that it was against the law. Not only that Medicare didn't do it, it was against the law for Medicare to negotiate with major pharmaceuticals for lower drug prices. So that was one of the achievements of the Biden administration, and Kamala Harris strongly supports that. Donald Trump, in his Agenda 47, is very clear that he wants to get rid of that and requirement of allowing Medicare to negotiate. So that could be a significant difference if it were to be enacted. Just a couple more items where there are differences is antitrust. Doesn't get much publicity, but there is just growing evidence. Again, you have to look into the weeds of the growing concentration in many industries in this country. Most of us are aware, say, the airlines is another good example, but the pharmaceuticals, most of the big manufacturing, are down to really a handful of companies that are making enormous profits. One of the reasons they're able to do this, of course, is there's very little competition. And the Biden administration and the Justice Department has brought suit against 5 major companies, including, I'm not going to remember, but including Google and Walmart and Meta, and I forget, there were 2 others. And just the other day, the federal judge declared that Google is in fact a monopoly. Now, what will happen, as you know, these cases take years and years and years to process, but that's a step toward trying to create more competition. It's interesting, Trump is very much opposed to antitrust action, and probably if he were to become the president, would direct the Justice Department to cease and desist from its antitrust activities. Vance, on the other hand, has been quite outspoken in support of greater antitrust activity. So my guess is that Trump will win the day on that one, but Trump has been very outspoken in wanting to reverse the Biden support for fuel-efficient cars and electric vehicles and the subsidies to those industries and those products. Harris is very much, and her vice president candidate Tim Walz has also been very much outspoken in support of these efforts. In fact, in Minnesota, the major goal is that by 2040, the state will be carbon free. Whether that's true and whether it happens, we don't know, but this is one of their major goals and steps taken in that direction. The Trump administration is in favor of drilling more oil, has no particular concern about the damaging effects. The Harris, Walz, Biden stand has been very much the opposite. I think overall, one of the things to sort of keep in mind is I've been interested here that Kamala Harris, and I've heard her say this 3 times now, he said, if elected, the defining goal of my administration will be to rebuild a strong middle class. And I think that every step, every action that she suggested goes in that direction. And I'm going to enumerate some of those, but just going back to her. Her tax measures, for example. I mentioned the lift, that is the tax credit for families earning less than $80,000. Increasing the corporate tax rate back to 25 or 35%. A financial transactions tax, add-ons on transactions of stocks and bonds and other financial securities will be a tax. And as she has proposed, although it did not get through Congress when she was in the Senate, a Medicare for all tax that would be financed by a 4% tax on incomes greater than $100,000. That's a hefty tax, but that would provide Medicare for all. And you can debate the merits of that, but I think it's a way of saying that here is a candidate who is committed to trying to do the things that make the economic life for middle-class Americans more secure. As I said, supports the extending the 2017 Trump tax cuts only for those earning less than $400,000. I want to conclude just by, this is a little bit of my own opinion, but I think globalization is here to stay. Increasing technology here to stay. One of the examples of the increases in technology that I have often mentioned to my classes is that in between 1990 and today, now that's over 30 years, it takes 1/10 the number of laborers to produce a ton of steel. Think about that. And that's simply because of technology, where it took 10 people to produce a certain amount of steel. It takes 1/10 that number of laborers. Those are real jobs, high-paying, quality jobs that have been lost. So globalization is real, technology is real, and there's a huge impetus, if we are going to succeed as an economy in the 21st century, to educate people for that new reality. It's a reality that by 2040, whites are going to be a minority in this country. And cultural values, like it or not, are changing rapidly. They've changed so much in our lives. Most of us can sit back and reflect on the early when people would talk about gay marriage, and maybe some of us sort of shook and said, well, you know, what's that all about? Well, these things have become normal in many parts of society, and they're going to continue to change. And we can debate each of them, whether they're appropriate or not, and how we handle it. But these are changes that are taking place. I think we have one party right now, it may not represent all Republicans, led by someone who says the way to attract the voters who are fearful of these changes, understandably fearful of these changes, whose lives have been uprooted, is to say, let's go back to a grander day. MAGA. Let's make America great again by going back to a day that in many of these ways was a better time. It is a part of nostalgia. The Democratic Party, at least if you listen to the rhetoric coming forth now, the rallying cry last night is from the crowd there, we are not going back. Now that, these are simple. One party, the party of nostalgia, make America great again the way it used to be. Now let's say we're going to accept these changes and move forward. That doesn't really solve anything. But I think it sort of represents a way of thinking about this election, be it not just on economic issues, but on a whole host of issues. I want to just finish by just summarizing quickly. I made a list of economic issues and how the two parties stand. and of no particular, on the Harris side, no more Trump tax cuts. Trump wants to renew the tax cuts and perhaps even make them greater. No corporate tax cuts, increase corporate taxes on the Harris side, cut corporate taxes to maybe 15% on the Trump side. Expand the Affordable Care Act on the Harris side, restrict or replace the Affordable Care Act. This is what they promised during the first Trump administration, got nowhere, unlikely to get anywhere through Congress again, but that's the goal. Medicare can negotiate for lower drug prices on the Harris side, no on the Trump side. More antitrust on the Harris side, not on the Trump side. Not for higher tariffs, much higher tariffs on the Trump side. And even the Cato Institute, this quite right-wing think tank, is very much opposed to the increase in tariffs. Subsidies for green energy and EVs on the Harris side, repeal these, as Trump said in something in the speech he made last night. I want to terminate the Green New Scam. Support more resources for the border, and mention that in a minute, is the Harris position. And we could spend a long time on the issue of immigration, but there was, as most of you know, there was a bipartisan bill that was presented to the House and never got really to the Senate. That was going to devote more resources so that the immigrants coming across the border could be processed, and those who had a chance to seek asylum could stay and be assigned a hearing, and those who did not have qualifications for seeking asylum would be sent back in an orderly way. The Trump people made clear they wanted that bill not passed. It never got a vote, but they did not want that bill considered because they wanted to make sure that this was a contentious issue in the election, which it is and which it will be. But Harris and Walz are very much in favor and highly support this bill for more resources to the border. The Trump administration obviously rejected that bipartisan bill. The House administration strongly supports the Federal Reserve. The Trump administration, although this is not in any official document, the former president has made statements that he thinks the Federal Reserve, which is by design an independent body, that the administration, in this case the president, should have more control over what the Fed does. The Harris administration wants to forgive student and medical debt for families of certain income levels, something that Tim Walz has done in Minnesota. The Trump administration says no. Kamala Harris, for many years, has proposed a family tax credit of at least $3,000. Again, this is a tax credit for eligible families, low-income families. The Trump administration says no. Support for clean energy is very much a part of the Harris Walz platform. The Trump administration simply says drill, drill, drill. The Trump administration is very much committed to fewer regulations, particularly in the fields of energy and finance. Although I read a recent report recently saying that though this is in the previous administration had been a big part of their platform, not much was really accomplished. Not many regulations were really changed. And the final thing is the both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are strong supporters of public education. They're both products of public education. The conservative and the Republicans are in favor of more school choice. Highly debatable issue, certainly, but one that impacts I think, greatly on our economy. So if any of you are still awake, I would welcome your questions and comments and thoughts. And let me just say one more thing. I know the one question, before you go, maybe you have it. The one question you all dying to ask is, what is the two candidates' position on crypto? And I mention that only because I read not long ago that the Trump administration is very much in favor of deregulating the crypto market. So I went online and have been trying to learn about crypto, and I'm afraid I don't know very much.
You talked about the Trump administration, if I heard you right, is interested in trying to solve the Medicare and Social Security issues, possibly by cutting or expanding the year when it takes effect.
Yeah.
But seems like one of our biggest areas of spending is in military. How does that compare, the spending in military compared to Social Security and Medicare?
Well, Social Security and Medicare are the biggest. But the reason, I think one reason to focus on those is they are defense spending is a form of sort of discretionary spending. Each year we can have a separate budget, and we do. Social Security and Medicare, it's built in, and unless there are major congressional changes in the whole program, they just keep getting, right now there are 70 million people on Social Security, and that number just keeps getting more and more and more. But to answer your question is, defense is a huge part of the budget, no question.
Because otherwise there's really not many other areas to cut.
No, absolutely, you take away defense, Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the debt. Interest in the debt now is the same. It's like $870 billion is the same as what we spend in defense. Within 10 or 20. So you take away those, and there's precious little. And so when you hear a candidate from either party say, "Oh, we're going to solve it by cutting waste," forget it. Is there waste? I'm sure there's waste, but not in the terms of the trillion. Our debt is $35 trillion. I don't know whether that's a lot or little, but it sounds like a lot to me. And so
all the old people.
We encourage them to smoke.
Yes.
No, and you can see why politicians avoid it. I'm not defending them, but guys, it's hard to know.
Question.
Huh?
Another question.
Sure.
Jim, this feels like an issue, climate, that's not in the same category as employment, taxes, tariffs. It's not as tangible and discrete. It's expressing itself in harsher ways every day. In Vermont, we feel it in the intensity of these rainstorms that produce such destructive flooding, but elsewhere it's food prices because of drought and sea level rise and forest fires and so on. And I get the feeling that that's not an issue that Democrats are going to be able to solve by themselves. It feels like a societal-wide issue, and I wonder what your recommendation is in terms of, I recognize that Biden did a tremendous thing with the Inflation Reduction Act and pouring that much money into all kinds of interesting infrastructure and ways to address climate. And we individually will put more and more solar panels on our roofs and drive more EVs and so on. And that'll make a little difference. And maybe we'll start to change our individual household behavior economically on a micro level. and that'll make a difference, but it feels way too small. What's your thought?
I mean, Gus is here to probably say much more about it than I can, but I think we all share the same frustration and recognition that nothing major can happen till we all get on board. And I'm afraid, and I don't want to be too opinionated here, but I think it's a little bit like the debt. It's one of these problems that there's so little that we can do right now. And well, it'll be okay for a while. And it's too easy to push it down the pike until something radical happens. Now, with a debt, something drastic can happen and you can recover. When the climate engulfs us, there's no going back. You can't sort of turn the switch back. But I don't know how I'll give Gus 2 minutes. No, I mean,
I wasn't going there on climate. I have two questions, one focused and another sort of cosmic. The focus question is, we had as a result of COVID, an impressive child support program put into place. It actually cut child poverty in the United States dramatically.
yes.
And they've expired now. Is there indication that either party is going to put these measures back into place?
Yes. Kamala Harris has been very outspoken about that. But as I understand it, her thought is to incorporate this into this family tax credit. And that it would be prorated based on children and on income. And like the earned income tax credit that doesn't go away as you earn a little bit more.
Right.
It, until a certain level, it allows families still to be getting this credit. And it would have it'd be prorated. So if you had 2 children, or 3 children, or 4 children, it would be larger. Now, whether it's inadequate, but Gus is right, that child credit, I mean, it had a hugely positive impact on reducing child poverty. But that has to be a priority. You know, someone at the top has to be saying over and over and over again and pointing out that child poverty is a real problem.
The broader question is, you mentioned at the outset this extraordinary inequality in the country, with the poverty rate very high, half the country just getting by paycheck to paycheck with no real savings to speak of looking forward, and the 1% even smaller with these vast resources. And I'm just wondering whether, if you put the Harris Walz program together, does it really make a big dent in that? Does it really move us dramatically towards a more egalitarian society? Or are these nice things that many of us would support, but which aren't going to deal fundamentally with this huge gap in wealth and income?
I think economists would say that taxes can make a huge difference. And they look back to the 40s and 50s and 60s where they did make a big difference. But the other half of that is that people have got to have the skills to perform decent paying jobs. We're not looking for an economy where we're going to improve the equality by just giving people incomes. We want to have people educated and trained in such a way. And that means dealing with child poverty. It means having families have enough so they can get by and educate their children. And we're putting resources into, I think personally, into public education, but at least into education. So I think I don't think it's going to be a dramatic. I think it's like all huge issues like that. It has to be incremental, but it can make a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, when we have, let you go on a sec, but when we have these vast corporations paying 0 taxes, and when we have many wealthy people perfectly legally getting by paying either no taxes or 5 or 10% of their income in taxes, which is a half or a third what most of us pay, that just isn't right.
On the tax issue, I think you're right to emphasize it so much. The bigger picture is that in the longer history of federal taxes, we have had measure after measure which decreased the top tax rate, and in fact imposed higher burdens on the lower income taxpayers in the country. And this goes back way before Trump. And so this is a fundamental issue. It's not just a question of sort of doing or undoing what Trump did, but it has, we have measures at our disposal to make huge changes if we're prepared to use them.
But there has to be a public commitment to making that happen. And
So I think people are pretty aware now that the fossil fuel industry is really driving a lot of climate change issues. But if you start talking to them, they say, well, without us, the economy is absolutely going to fall apart. Do you think that we could build an economy based strictly on alternative energy sources?
I don't know. I'm not in a position to, I'm not knowledgeable, but I think that's really the wrong measure. I don't think we have to have perfection. In other words, and others may disagree. That might be a wonderful end result, but if we could be moving in that direction and getting others to move, it seems to me. And at a time of elections, in my opinion, what's really key is to have leaders and spokespeople, and the president being the top spokesperson, who are out there every day telling us how important it is. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's boring, sometimes it takes a long time, but you have to have confidence, I think, that change can come. And the climate is something we've never faced before because it's irreversible. Other disasters almost always can be reversed. We get through the pandemic, we get through a recession, we get through periods of inflation, but there's no turning back the climate. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that the message I want to hear from a president, I don't care which side it's on, is this is important. And we've got to do everything we can, and we can debate whether having EVs is a good thing or solar panels are better. We can debate the particulars, but let's get a commitment that this is really important.
Thank you.
Do you or Kamala or Trump dream of simplifying the tax code?
Dream? Oh, sure. Will it happen? I mean, I don't know, but I just, in part because I think it's so complicated. There are so many vested interests in just the way it is. You don't kid yourself. There are a lot of people who love the tax code just the way it is. And I just can't imagine it happening, and no one's talking about it. I think only because I think it just seems like such an overwhelming task. I mean, can you imagine having to being the president? And we've talked about half a dozen issues here. We haven't even touched on foreign affairs, on international conflicts going on. Getting up every morning and having to be concerned about every one of those issues. And every time you walk outside, there's a reporter with a microphone in your face, wanting to know what you think about it. Oh my God.
Okay, thank you so much.